Welcome to the opening act of the spring season of the lecture series, Catalyst, this semester. As an announcement, next week we have 2 lectures in 1 week, so pay attention to the calendar. Liz Diller is lecturing on, is it Tuesday night? And then Mikel Adria is lecturing on Thursday night, so we have a busy week next week. But I'm happy to welcome Ben van Berkel here, who I've been trying to get here actually from when the first day I came into this position. So he's a little tough to extract from Amsterdam. Ben van Berkel, who founded UN Studio, or Unstudio like the Uncola, with Caroline Boss, studied architecture at the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam and also the AA in London. Caroline studied art history at the University of London, and she recently obtained a master's in urban and regional planning in Utrecht. This rich educational platform on which UN Studio is founded manifests itself repeatedly in the work that the office has produced since its founding. They first gained attention with their project for the Erasmus Bridge in Rotterdam and the Mobius House in Het Gooi, which is also in the Netherlands. Most recently, the Burnham Pavilion in Chicago, which Bob Sommel referenced last semester or last year in his talk. The Villa NM, a terrific house in Bethel, New York, otherwise known as Woodstock, which tragically burned just a year after it was completed. And the Mercedes-Benz Museum in Stuttgart have all demonstrated the firm's prowess. They're a crackerjack team. Their voice, both collective and individual, has been central to the conversation underlying contemporary global practice through their buildings, through their writings, and their teaching. Ben has taught at Princeton, Columbia, the Berlage, and UCLA, and is currently professor of conceptual design and head of the architecture department at the Stadel School in Frankfurt, as well as teaching at Harvard's Graduate School of Design this semester. So what interests me specifically about Ben and UN Studio is their project, or the catalyst that they sort of put, the fire they put underneath architecture, and their articulation of that project. Like hawks circling around their prey, they've been honing the terminology that best explains both their own practice and also how they believe one can or should practice in today's postmodern, global, technologically advanced context. Their project is not a style or a technique, but an evolving and precise experiment. While at first they deliberately eschewed the term typology, objecting to its normativity and its association primarily with institutional programs, and replaced it with the more practice-tied term model, they've recently come around full circle back to the term type. They speak of a serial typology, where type is no longer a fixed formal, spatial, or organizational system, but rather an evolutionary model, an instrument that evolves across several projects in their practice. For Ben and Caroline, these serial typologies or conceptual tools often stem from science. The Klein model, the V model are 2 such scientific diagrams. The twist, which we'll be hearing about today, comes less from science than from the combination of program and form. But their projects don't mimic science. Like scientific tools, they organize complexity, exercising control over form, program, and technology. Whether the right term is type, model, instrument, or tool, we'll find out soon enough. I applaud them for trying to find the right term, for realizing that it does matter, because therein lies their project. And by openly evolving the terms, word terms as well as architectural terms, they turn that experiment into a shared architectural project that we can participate in as colleagues and as users. Their project deliberately and very consciously evolves these models in order to address contemporary architectural problems. And in so doing, they demonstrate that one can practice in a way that's highly specific as regards each particular project, but that's also generalizable in terms of being a project, or maybe an unproject. I welcome Ben.
So thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me here, Sarah, and for your introduction. I don't know if I will answer all your indirect questions, but but I will try. The title, the twist sounds a simple title, but it is a very complex topic related to the latest development of our work, and for that reason I'd like to introduce the lecture as not being simply a lecture of showing our history of the work alone and going literally from project to project alone. I would like to talk, as maybe also suggested in the introduction, I'd like to talk more about the ideas and how we come to the work, and maybe would like to focus a bit also on the position of the architect today. Where do we stand? What makes our profession so fascinating, and at the same time in a period where we are in right now, so complex and difficult in the same time. So what are the challenges for the architect today? What is it that makes us rethink the practice constantly? And I've been always, of course with Caroline, been fascinated in this idea that we have been always organizing ourselves towards the way how we have organized architecture. So I'd like to talk about these double aspects of the way how we have been projecting and speculating on architecture related to the way how you can reflect it back also on the position of the architect itself. And in this first image, what I'd like to emphasize is the way how we've always been fascinated with the way how we could read an architecture, or how we can read the city. And we know this historical image of Manhattan with the piers being still active related to the grid of Manhattan, where the whole notion of consumption and production, I'm not responsible for that, I don't know. Where the whole idea of consumption, production and high finance is related to the way how Manhattan was originally planned. So this whole idea of the mechanical model, the industrial model of the city, operated for such a long time so well within the structure of the city. But as we know, that of course today the city is not operating anymore like this. I mean, we have been for a while been lucky to study certain parts of the city, for instance the area around Penn Station, and discovered that with the amount of people coming to the center of the city, like for instance every day almost 100,000 people coming to the Penn Station, similarly like to the Grand Central Station, we grouped information here on the level whereby it relates itself more to the liveliness or the unexpectedness of the way how we can search now today the city, and gives it a new understanding in the way how we map it and how we rethink it. And this has been always our interest of how today contemporary techniques can start to generate a new form of communication towards the way with who you communicate to, like your specialist or the specialist of the clients, and how it might start to generate a total new instrument for the way how you perceive the complexity or the instrument of its architecture or its context related to the way how architecture comes together. So here an argument was built up around the way how around Grand Central you have much more complex diversity in the 24-hour cycles of living, working, sleeping, whereas when you come into Penn Station, like for instance in the night, if you come to not only Penn Station but also Madison Square Garden, you walk out of the theater, then almost nobody is there around the theater. So very badly inhabited in its structure, with Hell's Kitchen on one side and Chelsea on the other side, totally blocking so many parts of this aspects of the city that it is not at all as lively as this part of the city. Anyway, when we showed this to the city, the city planners, they were shocked to see this information all together in this one diagram. And that's what I'm trying to say, that often new forms of communication, new forms of techniques can give new insights in a way you had seen maybe the information before, but not so differently grouped than in this way. So So this gave us a new form of insight in the way how we can direct and instrumentalize information towards the way with who we work. So further on in this diagram, we then started to develop a technique of what we called deep planning, whereby user groups, time, publicness on the site, accessibility, the way how the user groups were connected to the program on the site were then researched. And this whole idea of deep planning then transformed itself into new models of design, and maybe we would call it all now parametric design. But you have to imagine this was a study done in the beginning of 2000, whereby, or even earlier, whereby some of it was not only there to introduce new formal languages for that what we did with the computer, but purely introducing new instruments for design, new forms of communication, new ways of delaying conclusions in design. And I'd like to combine it with another argument, and that is that we introduce a new reading in the way how one can understand program today. And I start with the project we did in Korea. It was a department store for the Galleria. It was a really strange client asking us in the beginning, can you rethink the department in a total new way? We thought strange in that sense, but then we discovered that the client was after something what would go beyond what was purely related to commerce alone. And as today we know how difficult it is and how important it is in the same time not to be so direct with the direct requests from clients who are interested in the iconographic or the economical subtracts you can get from a project. We were so happy with a client who was fascinated in a project but could think beyond its own product. And for that reason, we worked with an idea here that a department store could be almost seen as similarly like we know from the museum, a place where you could install products so that the lights would be giving it a particular kind of attention, but that for us the most important was the public spaces within the building itself, whereby in this escalator zone, for instance, you would see in the mirrors or the half shiny glass the way how then you might see your colleagues, friends, or the people you walk with in this building, or your family, whereby almost the public space becomes a kind of catwalk within the building. And as we know, and this is then Korea, as we know, in Asia, shopping is another kind of experience because it is introduced quite late in the evening, there where sometimes people gather and like to enjoy to be with each other within these places. We argued also that it was not so important to restructure the brands on the facade, as in the beginning was a bit of discussion with the different owners of the building. We argued that it would be interesting to rethink a form of branding in a totally different way, as maybe as to be seen as an art piece, but could be having an effect towards the surrounding, whereby in this case an LED facade, whereby this dynamic facade could constantly change in so many different layers, so many different effects, that it could constantly be a different lamp or building within its surroundings. And it was actually called the lamp of the city later on. It became a form of an object within the city, but it was going beyond purely being promoting the idea of being a department store. And in this time, I'm talking here about also quite early in the so around 2004. This was one of the first large LED facades to be introduced with a highly complex program, whereby we could change this building in all these colors as you see in here. So to think of a project whereby you rethink the program and to give it a twist, to give it another interpretation, to give it a double reading, whereby the building becomes more public than only being there for the product alone, and maybe highlight in a way on another level the product by giving it counter forces towards the public spaces. As I said, was here and test and became successful, because a lot of people came back to the building, referred back to it as a social meeting place within the city of Seoul. Talking about this twist, here in the Mercedes-Benz Museum, we have tested this idea on a literal level. I would like to say almost here on a formal level, so that the twist incorporates the construction, the opening up of moving from one floor to the other, whereby you suddenly get a vista towards the other layers within the building. Although I explain it later that this is a building with two spirals going down, up and down. It's very difficult to sometimes know if you have been already there or there in the building. This moment of the twist in perception is something what you have to discover while you are going through this building, as if you would walk in a time machine, within the way how this time machine then generates so many different times within the time machine when you are walking around it. Tested in a one-to-one scale several times to see if the details of this part of the construction of the building, what was repeated 4 times over the whole structure, was so to be built that it could be, with its casting techniques, easily be repeated within the structure of the project. The organization of the building is so organized that you have here the central atrium. Some of the exhibitions have an internal view and some have an external view. And as you can see, none of the floors are matching, so they're all stepping up and down in different heights. The central core, or 3 cores, are holding up the construction, but it is not so that the construction is guided only by these cores alone. The whole movement between the facade moving towards the floor and bend the twist, as you can see here, so the twist comes back here, there, and also you see partly it here. They hold up also the construction on this part of the building, and of course in the facade we had a series of columns to hold up the span of almost 33 meters in the exhibition spaces. And you can see that here quite well, so here the twist is repeated over these 4 times within the building. But as I said, the diversity and the complexity of the project is, in that sense, disciplined through these twisting, constructive elements within the project, and creates a way of how this building is pulled together. The principle of it is similarly related to this model, as you can see here. It's, as was already said in the introduction, a mathematical model, in this case a trifold structure, but the trifold is here turned into a 3D model. And you can see here that the model, as you would build this in the size of the museum itself, then you would see that it needs almost no central structural element, because and that's what we discovered in many other mathematical models, that they adopt very easily architectural principles like construction. Here, like we noticed from the Möbius, if you take a piece of paper and you bend it over each other, then the Möbius structure, if you have it in a band of paper, holds itself up. And similarly with this model, this mathematical model, gave us a fantastic opportunity to be almost, I would like to say, self-supportive. And as maybe seen here, the building is so organized that you take 3 elevators, or you take an elevator, there are 3, and you come up in the top of the building, and there is one part moving through the history of the exhibition spaces, and another part is moving through the collection spaces in the building, whereby you sometimes have then these open view exhibitions, and then sometimes a more internal view exhibition. But as I said, 2 spirals sometimes so combined that you can step over from one space to the other, but creating this diversity and the double root of the museum. Also here I'd like to explain that this client was not interested purely in a showroom. And in that sense we were lucky, because we were having a dialogue similarly like what I said about the first project, about what could it be so that this building could be more than only a showroom. And winning the competition, one of the arguments one of the directors gave to us was that they were so fascinated in our idea of the way how you would walk through the museum and how you would perceive the objects within the building, you would step in higher in the space, like maybe here this balcony, you would walk down and then slowly would come closer to the object and then would see in different angles, different heights, different layers of experiences the object, and then you would be able to choose to see what you want to see. You would select when you come closer to the car. And actually this is what I use from many other possibilities I could not achieve in other designs or other buildings for museums I had designed. So all that was projected in this earlier part of the competition we designed. But the director was so fascinated in the idea that he said it would be so great if he could see more museums and thinking more about the museum as a place where this car could be presented, and referred to the MoMA. Because his argument was that if you would step into the MoMA, the first thing you see is the helicopter hanging above you, and arguing that a product like the helicopter is also an industrial design, and why could the car not be, as an helicopter, be an art piece in a museum? So again, here there was this shift given to the way how today we could rethink of what is a brand, not alone, or what is the object of presentation related to the way how we give it a cultural interpretation to the way how it is presented. But I come back to this later. What I'd like to emphasize about some of our research and the work we have done over the years is that we often think in the serial, as was also early on said, that for instance here the study of the twist was here so studied that we found a way in this house to test it on many levels, whereby the upper part of this house in the lower part of the relationship could be mixed with this double staircase, where the secluded elements were cooking, sleeping and living on this side of the house was so combined that this twist merged from the more box-like side of the house, you could argue, so the more rectangular part of the house towards the more softer, you could argue, the blob-like side of the house, where suddenly all the movements and the social activities or the interactivities between the members of the family of the house could then start to appear in this moment of the house and then slowly appear more in the house in the living area. So again, the formal language was not so much related to the way how the architecture here generates a particular geometrical form. It's also there where it interacts with a public construct. And this idea of the public and the perceptual construct, spatial construct, is for us very important to introduce in a way how we set up a dialogue between the internal ingredients of architecture in relationship to the way how it then is also perceived and used within in the organization of the architecture. So again, it is transformative, the geometry. It's introducing a twist not only in the way how it is articulating a spatial organization alone. Like maybe in this facade, it starts as an equal potential organization, but then slowly moves in an open structure and suggests, because it's a laboratorium, what cannot be having any window, to have an openness to its surrounding, where maybe there where it's not having a communication with this tree in the winter, but in the summer then suddenly starts to set up a dialogue with its green in its surroundings. But that it opened itself up, that it is transformed, is some of the research we have been lately working on. Not material-wise, also organization-wise when it comes down to the architecture and the formal aspect of the building as well. So in this model, as what we lately, maybe because it's not only anymore a diagram, but it became a model of thought for design. This model of having on the one hand a more equal potential organization and on the other hand a looser, more infrastructural side of it was used for many projects. This idea of the transformative and the liberation of a geometrical dogmatic principle was here a test or introducing a test for many projects, like for instance for the Arnhem train station, where on the one hand we had offices and on the other hand a train station with 2 bus stations, an entrance of a parking area, a bicycle parking area. So all the infrastructure elements and the public area was connected to this part, and the more quieter and the more secluded programs who needed a more grid-like organization were introduced on this side. Similarly, for a theater in Graz, where on the one hand we had a lobby with more public spaces on this side for the students and a more a black box theater on this side here, similarly was introduced in that area. You could maybe also connect this a bit more to, as you can imagine, for instance, to the Villa NM as you have seen it before. But this idea that one could liberate the stylistic aspect of architecture, that one can start to think of that what is more transformative, what is not very definite in the way how it can have a particular kind of formal language in one direction alone, was something what we discovered was a relief to play with. And in this aspect of that, how that could guide the organization of architecture on many levels, that it could easily adopt an architecture on many levels, was something we constantly tested in diverse models. And sometimes we called it all either mathematical models, where some principles were to be found in there, from the mathematical towards the V model as we called it, or the block the box model as explained it here. These models gave our work a serial quality. And a guidance to the way how we did our research. So this is a bit more information of the house I showed you before, with a twist part in the middle, but also towards its context connects itself very easily towards the shift in the landscape. How the glass and the color of the surroundings connects itself to the extension of the landscape, and then is reflected back onto the house, is what I forgot to say in the beginning, that this notion of reflection and meditation of an image where we can look at what generates again after images is where we were after, and literally that an image of an house could also start to generate a mirror of the artwork of the landscape was a similar study, an effect, I should say, we were after. And also in the house, like from the inside towards the corners, similar kind of ideas on the reflection was introduced. And read that idea of the notion of reflection in a double manner as well, because it was also connected to the idea how one could really literally meditate in the landscape. But that this aspect can generate a series of effects, but you cannot then grasp as a spatial organization or as an effect what is not so singular in its reading, is what we constantly test. Like in this latest project, what is not fully finished, it's from a similar coming out of a similar development of a project we did in Korea for that first project what I showed you, is in Facade with this lateral moray effect with a double layer of vertical elements so organized that when you move around the building, it's constantly playing with the idea of if the building is plastique or having a sculptural depth, or when it is flat or not, is something that you can almost not perceive when you are further away from the building. Also, only when you come closer, that it is so, then you discover that it is only pure graphic layer that generates these moray, spatial moray effects. Similarly, as if you come into the building, it's almost, if you step closer towards the atrium, it's first that you think that it's a building with only 4 stories high, but then when you come deeper into the atrium, it suggests to have maybe almost 20 stories in the project, but in the end it's only a building of 10 stories. So this moray effect, the idea of that a space can have a parallax effect, is here even more complex in the way when you come then into the building, into the space itself. So these large-scale projects we have been lately working with, and maybe with the Erasmus Bridge, what was one of our earlier infrastructural projects in Holland, where the idea of how the context, its political ambition, the way how the bridge was symbolizing a bit also that history of the harbor of Rotterdam, and the way how the robustness of this industrial background of the city could have a new link to the development on the south side of Rotterdam, was here one of the most important reasons why this bridge in that time for the competition we were doing for it was chosen. It had something of the grains of the harbor, something of that pushing the north to the south of the city, and when you are inside the bridge, then it's almost like if you stand into an architecture expressing that strength of that part of the city into the bridge. And in latest projects like in this project in Hangzhou in China, similarly we play with that idea of the history's landscape. I don't know if you know the city. It's quite a powerful city with a beautiful amount of lakes and mountains and landscape around these sites in Hangzhou. We wanted to work with. So here, within this part of the project where, I should say that the whole project is so diverse and mixed that almost 20 different types of programs are introduced here, over 500,000 square meters, so very unusual for us to work with. The city promotes the idea that people can stay on the site, so the city promotes a form of sustainable architecture where people will in the city use the infrastructure less by introducing so many diversity and combined programs within the project. We wanted to work with the landscape of the city, so that if you would stay in the lower part of the project, then you would have a connection to its, of course, its park and the surroundings, its urban quality. So the views from the urban would twist and move slowly towards the more landscape view of the city. And in that sense, also here, this building directs itself towards that context, not only purely in a visual manner, but also conceptualizes something of that landscape aspect, as I explained. So, as you can see, a project with many diversity in its program, from apartments, hotel, cultural programs, shopping on the lower part, again, apartment, housing on this side, and even working spaces on this part of the project as well. But as I had a wonderful discussion with the students this afternoon, what came up is what can one learn from today's architecture, and what can we learn from research and the practice, and And I argue that today, although how difficult it is to produce in a time as difficult as we are in right now, I've always believed strongly in production, the production of research, and at the same time producing an architecture whereby you constantly learn. And for that reason I argue also that the work is to be read in the serial instead of promoting constantly the idea that each building needs to be a highlight alone. Like in this project, I'd like to say that it is so fascinating to learn from China, in a sense to learn from quickness and to learn from sustainable ideas who are really heavily promoted right now. I noticed a lot in Asia, especially China, especially on the urban level as well. So here we're going for everything what is related to the most extreme when it comes down to the way how we can deal with the energy of the building, so that for that reason also the twist of the facade is connected to the way how we can lower the energy load coming on the south side of the facade, where it could be closed as much as possible and be opened there we are more on the north side. And for that reason we constantly test the way how this formal aspect of the building could relate itself towards the sustainable as well. And sometimes, I don't know if the dates are not here, but sometimes in half a day we could do these tests, because the dialogue with all the specialists on board wanted to know the information the next day after, because it needed to be built soon. Or similarly with the construction, we were playing wrongly enough with only column systems, where here in this case the atriums, the shafts, they all played a very important role in the way how the construction came together. Here you see that study on the way how this facade relates to the way how the energy load, like closing it down on the south side towards its openness, was here introduced. The project is right now on the construction, so the foundation is already on its ground, and you have to imagine this is a building of close to 200 meters high, and it will be finished next year, end of the year, with everything on it, in it, etc. So in 2 years' time, what would be never possible in Europe. Again, so if we think about the larger scale projects related to the smaller scale projects and the models I talk about, the thinking models, then we constantly like to express with our work that what is, and test what is possible. Like in this pavilion we designed for the Venice Biennale a few years ago, I think now 4 years ago, whereby this idea of the continuity of a material could articulate the idea of the way how a floor, a wall, and a ceiling might come all together. I don't know if you can see that here, but there is, for instance, no column in the space. The surfaces all fly in a way. They never touch, but there where they touch, they are partly of a single continuity within the whole space. And here we argued, how is it possible today as an architect to control the internal regulations of architecture in relationship to external influences? Like what is it that we can do in order to communicate between what we need to do with the way how we guide information? So and in that sense I've always thought that the aspects of not only pure political, social and cultural effects on the architecture are the most important to work with, but of course that it is constantly tested around the internal regulations of architecture, from, let's say, the geometry, the construction, and the way how one experiences also with the latest production techniques. And that's why these pavilions, they test these production techniques and become, in that sense, the testing ground for call it a form of reversed engineering to its design. And like in the Möbius house, we tested constantly the geometry in the way how here the Möbius was transformed into an instrumental design, because it literally, I mean, you cannot experience so clearly the Möbius when you are for the first time in the house. You have to walk through it, and then you will discover that the complexity is quite sober and simple by the repetition of the different degrees we introduce within the house. So the repetition of the 7 to 9, 11 degrees of the angles were constantly coming back into this house, whereby a form of calmness is also introduced in the relationship to its complexity of geometry. So a line becoming slowly a surface and then turning into a volume were tested in this pavilion, similarly like we introduced in the Möbius house, but here in a far more, maybe you could say in a more direct way. Or in this other example in Chicago, where we discussed the phenomenon of an urban lobby in the city of Chicago, in the Millennium Park, where this pavilion was built for only the summer, but became an incredible interesting public ground for many events to be introduced, not only during the day but also in the evening. For instance, tango lessons were given by people who wanted to do that with whoever wanted to join in the evening. But that a series of services can generate again here the construction of the diagonal views in the relationship to its history of the city, what is so rectangular organized on the one hand, but Burnham, as we know, introduced in the city a series of diagonal vistas. Similarly, we thought that these vistas are not happening in a vertical manner or in a sectional manner within the city. So that's why we said that maybe this could be a possibility for the future of Chicago's development. So not only think within the plan of the city, but hopefully you can see also a lot of other reminiscences of the city's history and its architecture, where it plays with. Again, this is seen not as an architecture. One can see this not as a finite architecture, in our opinion. This is only, and maybe I should be careful with the word pavilion. It's also not in a way a pavilion. It's a model. It's a testing model. It's a thought model for the way how this could be further projected on towards the way how it could generate a possible other architecture. Like I talked before about urban design models, or as I explained early on also with the way how we've worked early on with diagrams in our work. And you can see here that sometimes in the evening this became a very active place. And this is a topic we recently used as a series of principles, so explained in the work that, as here in this exhibition in GSD in Harvard, an exhibition just opened last week, whereby this principle of these thought models have been playing so much with the key and the development of our work. You can see here, so these are the images of the projects expanded over different walls. But if you walk around the space, then sometimes the installations or the pavilions, as you would like to call them, come together. So you can see that here. So this is the same. You can see this is a building, but projected over different walls. So whenever you walk into the space, constantly the projects fall apart and come together. Fall apart, come together. And you see here on the floor all the projects connected to the influences, or being proto-influenced by the pavilions, or having an after influence by the pavilion. This is not my dog, but I designed the bed for the dog. So that's what we do too. It's a loft for a friend, art collector in New York, where here the argument was that if you collect so much wonderful work and you want to live with your work, how would it be to open up your facade so that your facade becomes maybe one of the most important artworks in the loft? And would it not be possible to make it so in part of your exhibition that you constantly can work and live with this dynamic aspect of the artwork? So that's what is the key and the essence of the way how you are constantly drawn to this artwork of the exhibition space where this client lives in. You see some of his artwork here. It was really, again, a wonderful project to work on, whereby the idea of the artificial light with daylight in the exhibition space or living space was introduced, and you cannot see that so very clearly here, but his furniture is so organized so that on a carpet you can move it constantly around the exhibition space, so that whenever he and his family could then sit around another part of the collection and have then for 2 months or 3 months long another environment in his own house. Similarly, the books are for him part of the collection and so introduced in the house that they are so presented that they become a part of the collection. And again here, yeah, it's not so clear with this evening image, but again, especially during the day, you're drawn to these dynamic parts of the collection. So again, this aspect of the play of the geometry and the walls who are constantly drafting you from one part of the collection to the other, and who give a particular kind of individuality to the artwork from many sides, is a play we tested here in relationship to, again, what I said, the lighting, the way how the walls are tilted up, and so that all the air and installations are connected to that as well. Whereby also the floor becomes one continuous element to give an expansion towards the house. And maybe one can say again here, it's not clear if it is a house or is it an exhibition space. And that's also what the owner so wonderfully says often living here, that he doesn't sometimes know if he needs to clean up the bed in the morning or not, because he doesn't know if everything is an artwork or if he fully lives in the house, and this kind of constant doubt of what it is where he lives in is making him amazingly happy to be there with something he already worked on, where he could never live with. So from, let's say, the experience of a house that could be projected to its ideas around Asia, as I said before, the infrastructure of the architecture, the way how that might transport itself to its facades, or the way how we play with these aspects in architecture have been constantly on our mind to make an architecture that is communicative and what draws people to come back to the architecture, whereby again in this moire effect of this facade, whereby it's not clear if, especially during the day, if it is it's having 2 or 3 layers, whereas in the night it's giving you sometimes even more layers. Sometimes more layers, like you can see here that even the internal part of the building is coming through the facade as a 3rd or 4th layer within the building, is something where we here worked on. And I've been always arguing that it is that we today in architecture can go beyond the collage. And although I apologize for the ones who have been seeing this image too much, but it is this principle of the collage in architecture where we've been working with so much, where we know that in architecture over the last century has been similarly like in art, been playing with the idea of displacing its principles of the ingredients where we work with, that it could play with the possibility of connecting its parts, whereby maybe construction program and the way how it is organized, that it can then go beyond the principle of the collage and the seams of architecture. But as I try to argue is that today architecture can be seamless, but it's not only to be like in this image, an image where you don't have to see no seams anymore. I'm not arguing for either this type of architecture or either that, but I'm arguing that the transformative aspect of that what is possible today is that where we can radically far more be open about and be more extreme with, because it is more the organization of architecture what is today the most fantastic to work with than, let's say, the seamless or the seam organized architecture alone. As maybe in the project I showed early on, but I'd like to extend a bit what we did on this the Mercedes-Benz Museum, is that the whole idea of that you would have a line turning into a surface and then becoming a volume, and that it is a building, when you walk through it, it's almost like with this pen, you cannot put it off the screen anymore. That constant feeling of that you have an diversity in the building, whereby you have the feeling that spaces are following you instead of that they are in front of you, is something what is highly essential in this project. Model making was part of the process. It's not so that we only, of course, as you understand, work with the geometry alone or the computer alone. We make so many models to test constantly the operative aspect of the design, and that's what I forgot to say maybe in the beginning, that the deductive or the inductive and the deductive aspect of architecture in its process of design needs to be operative. It needs to be constantly in play in the way how you can refine it and push and pull it. Although there where it needs to be done quick, the process needs to be the same. Also here we had for this project only 1 year to design it, and again 1 year to build it. We learned so much for this project because the client here wanted to be highly competitive with another building, you know, probably from well, I'm not going to say, but it is a project, you know, in München. But it's also from a car manufacturer. So here, what was the case that we were asked to design a model in a scale we didn't understand. So I think it was 1 to 13 or something like that. The scale was given by the client, and for months we worked on it, and constantly we asked why does the client want to have the scale, and then we later understood because the client came with a little car, and I put it into the model, and that was the scale of the model. So that's why it was introduced in this manner. This is the section of the building then unfolded. So C and C connect. So you see that if you take one route in the building or the other route, then they are. It's almost like if the building here, you can see if you have to deal with two buildings, they have two structures, but sometimes they meet in the middle and then connect themselves to these floors, who are then layer you from one exhibition space to the other one, and you can step over from these two exhibition spaces when you walk down into the building. And this is really what you. This is not a rendering. It's really so that you, when you are walking in some of the exhibition space, this is the end of the exhibition space, and where here prototypes are standing on some of these pillars, but also hanging on the wall. It's almost like if you step out of this building. It's similarly like if you step out of a dream. These are some of the exhibition spaces with these views I talked about. And what was really wonderful here with this project was that we had the possibility to do everything in the work, like also the whole aspect of how the lights could have such a quality that you would not look into them that they would actually be controllable with so many new techniques that they could give the objects a fantastic lighting, also with a very light floor. So the light floor was important because that's what I learned in another museum, that if you give a light floor to the objects, then the reflection that comes back onto the car is highly essential. Also, with the light floors, we could almost reduce down the amount of energy close to 10% in the building. So the energy of lighting. Another aspect of the innovation of this series of what I'd like to call attainable ideas, because I don't like to call it sustainable, it's more attainable ideas, was that that we introduced a smoke detector system whereby when there would be a fire within the building, that the smoke would be pulled out of the building in close to 4 minutes. And you see that here in this tornado. So the smoke is sucked out of the building here in 5 minutes. And we do that by pulling in fresh air in the building in a circular manner. And on top of the atrium there is a machine that then sucks out all the smoke into in this fast time. This was almost impossible to introduce within this project, because you can imagine being in Germany, what is highly regulated when it comes down to building regulations, in a good way, because they also promote some of these attainable ideas within the project as well. They didn't want to build this installation because we wanted to make all the exhibition spaces open. We didn't want to have any kind of glass walls between the exhibition spaces and the atrium, so the whole building needed to be open. But the city didn't want that, and they said that this is not allowed. But we invited them with all the specialists who invented this technological aspect of the project. So here they're standing, they're all filming the event, and were so impressed, luckily enough, that then they approved it and went into their archive in order to show that this was actually a technique what could be used for this project. But the essence of this idea was that we could, with this, reduce down almost 50% of the materials in the building, and reduce with that close to also, I think it was around 14% of the cost of the building. So this is what I believe, that if we talk about sustainable architecture today, and maybe why I'd like to call it attainable, is that it needs to combine a series of intelligent aspects of the way how the specialists talk to each other, and that the intelligence comes not out of the ideas from my side alone, of course. I mean, it needs to come out of the way how you group the information and exchange the knowledge of your specialists in order to come up with these ideas and to make... Yes. Thank you. It's nice that you say that in the middle of the lecture. I wish you all said a little bit more and talked among each other. And, that would be so great if you do that a little bit more. Thank you so much. Just keep on talking among each other. But also another idea was but this is a much more common idea. You know that probably from concrete core activation, what is a bit more introduced in Europe, whereby with water pipes in the concrete, you can heat up the concrete for 3 hours in a day, and then for most of the day the concrete can stay warm. So that means that you can, with a minimal amount of energy, can heat up the building for the whole day. Again, this is an integral and not add-on aspect of sustainable architecture. That's what I'd like to set up here in the argument, is that we know a lot of add-on architecture or sustainable architecture whereby it is argued that it is sustainable, but my opinion is there that it is not fully integrated. So, gosh, I mean, I can talk endlessly about it, but maybe briefly about the way how we communicated with all the different parties on the level of how computational design came here together. This was a 3D model, and we talk about 2005. At that time we had not the program Grasshopper, We were setting up our own digital programming techniques to in our 3D model to exchange information with our specialists almost from one day into the other, whereby 200 specialists could have the changes within this model the next day. And that was, I mean, at that time, really fast. Today we can be so fast with this because we know that we are working with the latest more up-to-date technology. It's becoming a little bit more common to work with this new techniques, but here we were even supported by the client so that when he discovered that we could do this management work around the project so fast, that I learned that the computer is not, and I knew that, sorry, I mean I should explain that from the beginning onwards because we used that technique already with the Erasmus Bridge in 2002, I should say 94, sorry, where we used a 3D modeling technique, whereby we used the 3D modeling technique also for the production of the steelwork for the Erasmus Bridge. So here, what we discovered that the computer is generating so much wonderful infrastructure for your communication to all your parties. So it's not there for the formal quality of the architecture at all. I mean, this is what so much is promoted in architecture over the last 10 years, that the formal language of architecture is expanded by means of the computer, and I would say not at all. I mean, the way how the computer has generated and revolutionized architecture is only by the way how we can communicate with the computer today. And that's how we should use it. So here you see the building from its in. So with the open space, as I mentioned, here is this opening where the smoke comes out. You have to visit the building because it's very difficult to grasp the building again. If you're on the outside, it's almost like if the building is again 3 stories high, but if you come inside it, you will discover that you think it's 9 stories high, but it is less. So, and I'm not going to tell you the number. So again, you know, this aspect of the transformative is key, and how the transformative can turn into a cantilever, in this case, in this music theater in Graz. So a black box with a public space is on this side where you can just move into, and then you frame it. And the frame is not so key. The key is the way how the organization of the architecture comes together, and how when you step into the music theater, maybe in this public space you can look at music, and that maybe the looking at music is as important as to listen to it. By walking up into the foyer space, where also, the space is more or less column-free, where different performances can be held, there where the building can become more public. This is the twist in the middle of the central part of the building, what holds up all its floors, as you can see here, but the way how we did this was to push up the concrete. So the concrete was not poured down, but was pushed up so that we would not have any gravel edges coming to the sides of the concrete, as you can see here. So this is the only column, you could argue, what carries all these floors above it. So, and that idea of the articulation of the graphics in the spaces are spatially also coming together out of the building itself. Its facade suggests to be closed, but then when you come closer, then suddenly it opens itself up. Here's one of the students going to the theater because there is a performance that day, and in the night it really opens it up even more. I don't know, this was a diagram I was actually drawing quickly after I had the dialogue with the students, whereby I argued today we can expand architecture far more faster than we know. Before, architecture's principles of functionality and aesthetics were so close. Now we can stretch it up so much more further by the utilities of architecture and the possible readings of architecture, from the way how it could connect itself to art, fashion, science, the way how today it can be experienced on so many wonderful levels. Today, if you want, you don't have to know where the utilities or the reading of the architecture come together. You can, if you put this line in a circle, or you put it into a puzzle in a new form of a category of a mathematical model, like you see here in the trifold, these principles can be sometimes pointed at randomly and maybe sometimes not be recognized where what is within the architecture. And maybe this line refers more to the grid behind here. So like maybe I refer to the grid of Manhattan, where the consumption and the production and what I said, the high finance came out of this geometrical principle. But is the grid not to be rethought with this related more classical model of the way how we were thinking more mechanical in architecture? Today we have to rethink its principles and the way how geometry comes together and how it can start to express another form of an architecture whereby, like in this camera, that it can produce another architecture. This camera is maybe here to be seen as an art piece, but luckily enough it can also produce, apart from being an art piece, an architecture by itself as well. And I'd like to keep that here for you. Thank you very much.
I trust you'll take some questions.
People don't do that here.
I have a sort of maybe. Well, anyway, I have a question. So everyone can hear me. So your project's clearly invested in looking at these formal techniques like the Mobius and Klein model from the kind of from a kind of exterior position, like looking at them kind of abstractly. But it's also very invested in the kind of the perception of that form and the way you showed the slides and you finish with the kind of camera, which is kind of coincidental, I guess. But you're always showing us these views where you're very invested in the kind of perceptual effects of these forms as well, not just the sort of geometric possibility of them. And then there's a couple projects that you showed, one's in Kaohsiung and one's in Korea, that have these sort of pixel walls, these kind of pixel media walls. And some of the other surface projects that have a surface, there was a lab project that had the kind of yellow. But I'm mostly interested in how you look at these kind of pixelated surfaces, I guess, where you could do anything, right? You could show a movie, but you're having to somehow choreograph or syncopate or somehow design that experience of these pixelated surfaces. How you see that in your work, in your taxonomy of types, in a way that you showed all your projects in.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should not show two slides, but do you remember that this first project in Korea, this Yule project with all the different glass elements, is similarly talking about the notion of the grid in a way. So you have a circular grid. But that you have a facade what is singular and very repetitive, but then generating during the night another kind of reading through complexity, what is to be found in the more mediating aspect of the facade, is where similarly you could say this whole idea of the development of the grid turning into a soft geometry, or the box, the blob idea comes together in this media facade, because it generates two or many geometrical effects, many dynamic effects. And it's just a test, because I wish that this idea could be slowly turned into the architecture itself also, like how could we make architecture more dynamic in a way, how could we, although I don't believe that architecture will move so easily, where these fantasies has been around a lot of how architecture can become much more dynamic than we know it. But I'm just interested in that idea that we can mediate the image of architecture even there where it's stable. Think about the Mercedes-Benz building. I mean, it's all about maybe the mediation of the spatial effects that are following you, like I said, or are read on a level where it's highly kaleidoscopic and diverse, where it's a very simple kind of, in a way, idea of the two spirals coming together. So this idea of the reductiveness versus the idea of complexity plays there also a very important role. So it's not clear maybe, but it's there. the links are there.
It seemed like in the first project it was more of a kind of screen surface, like the grid.
Yeah.
And then in the project that I think is in Taiwan, it was more of a, it was more integrated with the kind of formal geometry that was these kind of on the facade. So there it became maybe even more ambiguous, I guess, its relationships with form.
Yeah, but like I said, you probably see that in general in the work as well. Sometimes the work is highly articulated, sometimes it's sober, sometimes it's mixed. Sometimes this idea of the transformative is really connected in the work. So that's maybe what I said about the grounds of the principles of that. That sometimes the work is more, sober. Doesn't matter to me. It's more the principles and the thought models who are behind it. These are the key for me. Even when it is a screen alone. Although the idea of the screen is that idea that it is a public screen and that it is connected to that idea of the catwalk inside. I didn't go into the images of that. I didn't have them, but you should see these images. It's really nice that if you come in the building, it's like you really have a kind of catwalk. The lights are only in front, above the public areas, and create a very direct way with the public forces within the building. And it's this highlight of that you make the public more important than the products. That was the argument. Was a key maybe idea also for the facade.
So Troy's point is interesting in terms of the idea that many of the projects sort of rely on that ambiguity of the object, but that in order to read the ambiguity of the object, you need at some point to read the object.
Yeah.
Right? And so you didn't show the project for Singapore, which is much, much bigger, but I wonder as you start to deal with some projects that are, and maybe Almere is also a good example, but projects that are more at the urban scale, how do you deal with that same problem? Or does it disappear at that scale? In other words, when it's so big, you can no longer have that moment of legible object.
Yeah, but what I like where it becomes, let's say, more urban and so large in its scale, then I discovered that it is sometimes even more easy to handle, strange enough, because it can generate a series of diversities in the scales, what I could not do so easily in a smaller project. Like in a smaller project, you can play with the different layers of scales, but not so. You cannot expand them so far, like I said. And in the urban, we can expand them much further. If they operate always, like for instance, what I explained about the Hangzhou project, we have to prove that is going to work later on. I hope it's going to work there similarly as I promised in the explanation, but I see more opportunities there.
Terrific talk, really great to see the work. But you've upset me.
Good.
I don't mean so much that you made me mad, but I thought I understood a history of architecture to be always comprised of three parts. Basically, it's always commodity, firmness, and light, program, technology, form, whatever you want to look at, however you want to term it. But I always also thought that architects had to amplify one of them. Technology would come forward, form would come forward, program would come forward. It was always necessary to claim territory that one be amplified.
Yeah.
I don't think you're doing that. But I wanted to know how upset I need to be. But I wanted to know if that's true, or if you in fact see those three hierarchically or not.
Yes, but I am not making any particular kind of. I don't make a particular kind of order what is predictable in that. I do think that that I'd like to postpone and delay any decision making on that level. It's discovered. It's sometimes so that we don't, like I said, we don't work on the formal or the aspect of technology there where we are working on the earlier process of design. I mean, we actually literally believe in the proto-functional. Everything what is before, that was what becomes utile, needs to be studied, we believe, in order to make the argument right for what you make. So it's more call it the meaning what you give to the structure, and the way how you organize the 3 layers of what you call form.
Yeah.
And
In a way, it plays into Troy's question as well, in that the cycling happens across projects. It doesn't happen in one project. It happens across 10.
Yes.
Where you see one coming forward and the other one going back, and another one coming forward in the next project. So it actually, for me, it explains the skin. That you can just deal in appearance or form in the case of the skin, or phenomena, however one wants to characterize that. And,
but can I ask you what is really upsetting you? Because because I would like to know. Because would it be for you then more important to say, well, I'm choosing this building to be only facade, or would it be important for you to know that I would say honestly, listen, this is a real box-to-block project, and that's really working as a box-to-blocks? Is that what you want me to say?
No. Actually, I think that the facade project for me, or the department store, is somewhat anomalous and a very interesting experiment that then feeds into other parts of the work. So actually, for me, it doesn't destabilize the fact that you see those equally. It works very well. The project, and I like the project, don't get me wrong, but the project that upsets me or perturbs me is the Mercedes project, because that one, every time I look at it, I think, it's technology, it's form, it's programming. I can't actually, I oscillate very rapidly when I look at that project among those 3.
That's interesting, because you would be shocked if you see the project. because
Not just upset.
No, you will be shocked. Yeah, you will be shocked, because that project is scary, disturbing. You're right, but more on the level of spatial effects. You can't really grasp the building, and it's not about that what you describe. Honestly, it's more about that it is highly labyrinthian. It's very, very diverse in the way how you come into the building. I don't know if you've read. I mean, you know this. You know the whole description of Rosalind Krauss' passage of the way how she described the sculptures from last century, and how certain artists wanted to explain how certain sculptures were operating spatially for them. She describes that so beautiful in her article on the passage of modern sculpture. This building is all maybe in a way about that. If you come into this building, it's so that it's constantly so that the spaces are sometimes to be experienced. Sometimes if they are underneath you, above you, on the side of you, or it's highly complex. And this diversity is combined with, on the other hand, a highly reductive system, organization. But you cannot grasp it. So as bold as it comes over, as formal, and with the concrete, and it comes over very bold. It's in its scalar effect the most complex project we did until now, and that's why you have to really see the project. It's really so that is only to be experienced when you are there. And I would say it's again not there about form. Not at all. It's more about, again, organization. It's about the organization of a spatial experience, but it's not linear. It's not Didion. It's not time-space organized. It's like I said, it's like if you walk around in 4 spaces or times in the same time. And that's what I try to argue, that we said it also in the discussion with the students. Today it's not discussed so much what are the spatial effects of architecture today. Whereas if we talk about communication, how we deal with new technology today, we can be in 10 spaces today at the same time. But in architecture, that's not experienced at all. And I mean, do you know a discussion today of what is space in architecture today? I mean, it's not in the academia, it's not discussed. So I like to bring up that argument much more than the formal aspect of architecture. I like these questions, a little bit more disturbing questions. Right. Why not more of them?
Well, if no one else is disturbed, we will hold our disturbance until tomorrow noon when we have the final public response and discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you.